So Jake, I don't know for sure how many people RSVP'd, so let me know when we're ready to start. I don't want to start too soon.
Yeah, I think that we could just start with our smaller group. I'm not sure how many people are going to attend after this, so
Okay, that's
um, yeah, we'll start off. I'll start off by um, reading some of your bio to help introduce yourself. So Mindy is an academic advisor in the mechanical engineering department, and she graduated from Iowa State in 2006 with a degree in animal science and proceeded to earn her master's in education in 2018. And she's worked with the Office of the Registrar for 5 years, where Mindy's developed a passion for social justice and equity work. Upon graduating with her master's, she received the opportunity to work more directly with students as an advisor. And yeah, so that's Mindy, and I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more if she'd like, and we can get started.
perfect. Thank you, Jake. So I'm going to leave my video off just because sometimes I have connectivity issues. I live 10 miles out in the middle of nowhere, and it was actually a miracle that we were actually able to get internet and not have to use our cell phones for mobile hotspot. So um, that's just why I'm going to keep my video off. So just out of curiosity, in case you were wondering. But yes, as Jake said, my name is Mindy Heggen. I am a graduate from Iowa State. I am a mother of two. I have a son that is in fourth grade and a daughter that's in seventh grade. Both of them are virtual learning from home. So everything that you all had shared in the previous conversation about the struggles of learning online, et cetera, I have seen in my children as well. So I have seen it through a different lens, and I don't know how y'all are doing it, to be honest. I am a wife, been happily married for 13 years. I have been an academic advisor for 2 years. I'm also an instructor. I teach Engineering 101, the orientation class. And in our department, we have ME 202, which is a career planning class. I have become the sole instructor of ME 202, which is about 250 to 300 students a semester. So those first 5 things that I just mentioned about my identity are all public knowledge. You can find out that information pretty easily through the directory and just by doing a Google search or Facebook search. But what some people don't know are some parts of my identity that aren't as necessarily visible or as transparent. I am a cisgendered female. That means I look female, I was born female, and I identify as female. I am white. Probably assumed that based on the picture, but that is actually how I identify. And I currently identify as middle class. However, I did grow up very low socioeconomic status. We were on the welfare system, moved around a lot. So I had experienced that as a child, but have been fortunate enough to be in the middle class after working towards my degrees, et cetera. So there's pieces of our identities that we walk with every day, but we get to choose when we disclose them. Another thing is I have anxiety. If I didn't tell you that, you probably never would have guessed. So it's really easy to hide some of the disabilities or different abilities that we have. So just by meeting somebody, you may never know whether they are battling anxiety, depression, or anything. It's pretty easy to hide at times. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide you an opportunity to understand the intricacies of privilege and kind of think of your own identities and how you became the person you are today and what privileges you may or may not have given that you identify with a certain socio identity. I want to highlight that we all have some privileges. Some of us have more than others, but at some point we all have some privilege. And I want to give you all time to think and reflect on the statements that you're going to hear today, your thoughts, your feelings, and hopefully some interaction between our small group here. This presentation is not intended to make anybody feel guilty. It is normal to feel guilty when hearing some of these statements, but that's not the intention. We are not going to blame anyone for having more privilege or power than another. We're not going to blame anyone for us not having power or privilege. So when you hear, let's start the race, or, we're all in the race for the same job post graduation, the visual that normally comes to mind is something like this, that shows that we all have the same starting line. We're all starting at the same point. We're all graduating the same year with the same degree, so we all must be equal. That's not necessarily the case, and that's something that this exercise is going to show. So what I would like you guys to do, or you all, because we're not all guys, is to listen to the statements that I'm going to read aloud. And I want you to mark down either electronically or on a piece of paper or hold up fingers. You may not have enough fingers and toes for it, but just somehow make note of the things that I say, give yourself a point or a step forward. And then be sure you're able to delete or erase when I say take a step back. For example, if I read, if you have blue eyes, take one step forward, only the people with blue eyes will add a mark to their sheet. This activity should be done in silence. Being it is virtual, nobody will be able to see you make your mark. Nobody's going to hold you accountable for making a mark or removing a mark. If any statements make you feel uncomfortable, I want you to be okay with that uncomfortableness. I want you to sit with that a little bit and remember the statement that is making you feel that way. This is an introspective exercise, and it's important for you to understand how privilege affects your personal life, but it is not designed to make you share things which you don't want to share. We will have a time to have discussion, and during the discussion, if you don't want to share anything personal, that is fine. You don't have to. But I do ask, when sharing, use the I statements. So I felt XYZ instead of we. Don't try to speak for your whole gender, your whole race, or any of the parts of your identity. Just speak for yourself. What questions do you have before we get started?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, so with that, I don't see anybody else unmuting, so I'm going to assume that there's no other questions. So what I would like you to do is to make a mark if English is your first language. Make a mark if either of your parents graduated from college. If you were encouraged by your parents or family members to attend college. If your family had health insurance when you were growing up. This one might be tricky. You may not know the answer to this because your parents checked you into the doctor, they just signed in and you went back. So if you didn't see your parents pull out an insurance card, just make a guess if you don't know for certain. Make a mark if work and school holidays coincide with religious holidays that you celebrate. So all of those would have been steps forward if we were in a physical setting. So now I want you to erase a mark or take a step back. If you have been divorced or have been impacted by divorce. Erase a mark if there have been times in your life where you've skipped a meal because there was no food in the house. Erase a mark if you have a visible or invisible disability. Erase a mark if you grew up in an urban setting.
Does urban mean like the suburbs count as urban?
I would count that as urban. They usually have less resources than inner city, is kind of where that's getting at. Erase a mark if you have been bullied or made fun of based on something you cannot change. For example, your gender, your ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, maybe even a birth defect. So those would have been steps back. So let's go back to making steps forward. So again, I want you to make a mark if you were ever offered a job because of your association with a friend of the family. This could be an internship, co-op, or full-time job offer of some sort. Make a mark if you or your family inherited money or property. Did grandpa, great grandpa pass away and pass on the farm? Did they leave inheritance? Make a mark if you came from a supportive family environment. That could be emotionally supportive, physically, financially. Make a mark if you are a U.S. citizen. Make a mark if there were more than 50 books in your household growing up. Okay, now we're going back to erasing marks and taking steps back. So, erase a mark if you were ever stopped or questioned by the police because they felt you were suspicious. Erase a mark if your parents were ever laid off or unemployed, not by choice. Or if you were ever uncomfortable about a joke or statement you overheard related to part of your identity, but felt unsafe to confront the situation. Erase a mark if your ancestors were forced to come to the United States not by choice. Erase a mark if you took out loans for your education. I want you to make a mark if you identify as a white male. I want you to erase a mark if you ever felt unsafe walking alone at night. That was a lot of statements, a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to digest. I want you to take a minute and check in with yourself. How are you feeling? Are you feeling embarrassed? confused, bored? Are you wondering about something? Are you questioning part of your identity? Take time and check in with yourself. Now we're kind of getting to the interactive piece. If anybody is willing and able to, I'd like to know, how did it feel to make all of the marks and take a virtual step forward?
I know when I felt like whenever I put a mark down, like there was some joy just because like, oh yeah, I relate to that.
Good. Anna?
Yeah, I would say it was like, oh, this, like, it helped. It made me feel grateful that I could mark that as a yes. But there was also the feeling of like sadness that not everybody could identify with that.
So some realization that there's differences.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I it made me think about every time I stepped forward, it made me think about like what kind of people might not have been able to take a step forward for that.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, like for a couple of the marks forward, made me think like, or like, I guess I didn't realize that some of these things, impacted me as much as they might have, like in a positive way. So it kind of shows that there's more things to be grateful for than you might have first thought.
Is anyone willing to share one of those statements that you took a step forward that you've never even thought of as part of your identity, that you benefited from that?
Definitely the healthcare one. I never really thought about that.
For me, it was just like having books in the house, just like a nice, easy way to, get learning and reading.
Yeah.
I made a note of like my religious holidays aligning with school breaks.
Yeah, honestly, that was the one that had impacted me the most when I have done this exercise. Um, Prior to working at Iowa State, I had never known a Jewish person. Their holidays do not line up with ours, ours being the United States national holidays. And so that really made me think, because I get days off for my Christmas holiday, but they don't get the days off for all of their holidays.
Yeah, I would say the holiday one for me was most shocking.
Thank you. Now I want us to think about how it felt to erase a mark or to take a virtual step backwards. How did that feel?
I know for me, whenever we did the step back ones, I felt almost kind of embarrassed because I just found that I couldn't really relate to most of the ones, and it kind of like made me realize like, wow, like I take a lot of things for like advantage from all these step forwards that other people can't.
Thank you, Caden.
I guess for me, when I took a step back, I would kind of think about like at first I would think and say like, oh yeah, I should take a step back for that. Um, but then like my immediate reaction was to um try to make an excuse for it. Like say, oh, but this only happened like a couple of times and it's not really a big deal. So I was like having some inner conflict with some of them.
Yeah, that's common.
I think for me there was a little bit I'm gonna be honest, there was very few times where I did have to take a step back, but when I did, it was, man, yeah, it would have been nice not to have to deal with that situation or have to struggle with that.
Did you ever find yourself saying, but it wasn't my fault? When you had to take a step back, well, it wasn't my fault I had to take a step back.
Yeah, I think for a couple, there was some that I like don't have any control over whatsoever. So
Yeah, I like this being done in this virtual setting because I think you can be a lot more honest. When it's in a physical setting, it is easy to feel judged. If I take a step back, then everybody will know that we didn't have food growing up. I don't want people to know that, so I'm just going to stand here and dwell on that thought. So the virtual format we are fortunate to be in, you're able to think about that and be honest with yourself. So that is a benefit of what we're doing. But I want you to think about how many steps forward you made, how many steps backwards you made. Did you make the same number forward and backwards? Or do you find yourself on one side of the line, the starting line, and not the other? And a few of you did briefly talk about that feeling. So talk to me. How does that feel to be on that side?
I guess because I'm after the tallies have been all done, I'm very far ahead of the starting line. Which I mean, it like in a bad sense, it feels like good because I'm ahead and I'm ahead, but also it feels bad because I'm ahead for reasons that I didn't control and I didn't put any effort towards being at that spot. And it was kind of enlightening to how certain privileges have set me forward that other people that I just take advantage that other people don't have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was also like ahead of the line, and it made me wonder like what it's like honestly to not be where I'm at. You know, like it takes some maybe empathy and like to try to see that perspective, and that's something that can be difficult.
So prior to doing this, did you feel like you had experienced an average amount of privilege and then it turned out to be a lot more? Or did this show that you have less than you thought?
I think I was aware of um, a certain degree of privilege that I have, especially like being a white, like cisgender female, and knowing that that eliminates a lot of oppression that happens. But I think some of them definitely did catch me off guard. And so knowing it was still, yes, I've got more privilege than I expected, even from being partially aware before.
Yeah, I would agree with Anna. Just 'cause I had some sense of the privilege that I had in my life just from like past groups like this, but this really brought to light some of the things I didn't think about being privileged, like the books or like the holidays. Like those are things I had never even thought of before.
So we mentioned that the books and the holidays are a couple of the sentences that were impactful. Were there other sentences that were impactful or more impactful than the others? I think they were all impactful, but was there some that were more impactful than others besides the books and the holidays?
I think definitely if you were encouraged to go to college. Because I know since I was young, like college didn't seem like an option. It was like you're going to college no matter what. And so it's one of those things I just never thought about. Then some like households, like college might not be like pushed towards that after education. So that was something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, that's not one I don't think we commonly think about.
I would say for me, the like has your family received inheritance? Because I know like there's such a big net worth gap between like the white and the black communities, and I know that that is a big factor in that is generational like inheritance, and so knowing that I am benefited from that and a part of that, interesting.
I found that one hard to think about because I personally have not inherited, but I know my grandpa did. And I know, like what you were saying, Anna, being white, that made privilege. So that one was a little bit harder and took some thinking for me. How about you, Jake?
Yeah, I thought that the one of the most relevant ones, like to maybe now, is like stopped by police because it's just something that I don't know, as like I identify as white and I know that um, being stopped by police isn't really a concern of mine ever. I like obviously um, like I don't want to be stopped by police, but I know that they're doing their job, and I'm not like scared of them at all, as opposed to maybe some other groups of people that might be frightened from being stopped by the police, and it's not because of something that they can control, but might be something that is out of their control.
Yeah, it's not like me speeding on the way to work and then being fearful that the cop's going to be there and pull me over. That's a different type of fear than I'm not even doing anything and I'm going to get pulled over. And then when I get pulled over, what do I do? And that's a different type of fear.
Yeah, for me, I would say my parents not being like forcibly laid off from a job. It's been like impactful, especially through like, recessions and whatnot. Um, that yeah, like there's so many like financial difficulties, and that really also ties into like the healthcare piece of it in America here. So that's something that like stood out to me too. That like something to be really grateful for, like parents having good stable jobs.
Yeah, and with the pandemic, the health insurance is a huge impact factor that, prior to the pandemic, I'm not sure many of us had ever thought of. I know I personally hadn't. Um, and so I think the pandemic has brought some of those challenges forward. But why is it important to know your privilege? So, what are some of the impacts on others that you think your privileges have?
Well, I think a huge one would be going back even to the healthcare one, like we were just talking. So then when I was little, like if I broke my thumb or like if I broke my toes or something like that, like or like or even if I just sprained my ankle or did something like that, like I was able to go in and get it fixed right away. And if you didn't have healthcare, like there's a chance that like you could not go in and get that fixed just because of the cost. And then that can cause like life changing like malformations within the body or something like that. That can cause effects down the road. Just a thought.
Yeah, or even if you were in the urban setting, is there a hospital nearby that can fix what is broken? Is there that access to the health care? So not you may have insurance, but you don't have access to the facility.
I think that being privileged, um, it can impact others because you might not be aware of um, the kinds of things that people that aren't as privileged might be going through. So what might not sound like a big deal to you could be um, like like really impactful for others. Like for example, maybe even driving to work or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jake. Some important questions to be asking when you're thinking about your privilege and the impact that it might have is, do others feel like they belong in the same space or the same area as you? Are others like them in the space? Or are they the only one? Do they need assistance? Does that assistance look like a ride to work, like Jake was saying? Is the assistance they need access to better health care, mental health services? What does that assistance even look like? Now, what kind of impact does your privilege have on yourself? Or what kind of questions do you think you should be asking to evaluate the impact on yourself?
I think the one of the things like the impact on self is like what opportunities have I received because of my privilege that maybe other people don't have. Um, I just remembered even the question of like, have you received an internship or a position because of like you're a friend with an associate or someone in a position that can help you with that, and that was true of me, and I forget that that is how I like got those opportunities, is through connections that I already had.
No, I agree with you, Anna, there because I also received an internship through a friend of a family. Looking back and analysis on that, like it probably cut some of the middle people out that could have also been good at that job just by the fact that I would know like knew a person. Like someone could have been way more qualified, but I got the interview because I knew the person.
Just a quick reminder, I want to make sure you remember that this isn't to make you feel guilty that that was a privilege of yours. It's just making sure that you take a moment to recognize that you have that privilege. Some other questions to be asking is, are you alone in this space? So is it you're not privileged? You know, is there a piece of your identity that is putting you behind the starting line? Is there a way you can leverage your privilege to assist others? Is there something you can do? Offer a car ride? Or do you yourself need to reach out for help? So part of knowing your privilege is, am I privileged or am I at a disadvantage? And if I'm at a disadvantage, should I be reaching out for help? But how can your privilege or not privilege impact decisions?
Um, I would say maybe it can impact like the amount of decisions you have because if you have like certain more privilege, you probably have more options available to you, and so therefore more decisions.
I feel like also maybe people with more privilege are more willing to take risks. Maybe like start a business, for example, because they know that there are things to fall back on and things that they have going for them that can help them um, if things go well or not.
Yeah, that's a good one. How about taking time to evaluate if that decision is going to impact others negatively? If you know your privilege, for example, what's going on in the Supreme Court right now with are we going to overturn Roe v. Wade? Is it only males making that decision? Do they need to bring a female in for their opinion so that's reflected in the decision? Is that decision, regardless of where you stand on it, is that going to affect others negatively? And does that outweigh the positives, or do the positives outweigh the negatives? To have a less controversial topic, look at the pass not pass policy that students are asking Iowa State to have this semester. What kind of negative impacts could that have? Iowa State students could be privileged to have that opportunity, but what does that mean for students that are not Iowa State students? Is that put you at an advantage because your semester GPA is going to be higher compared to UNI and Iowa students or Purdue students? But also when making decisions, ask, is there an equal solution that might not give you what you want, but what is needed? And that one's hard because I think we as humans are naturally selfish beings. And by golly, I want that candy bar. But do I need the candy bar? Can I get away with doing something else instead? What additional questions or thoughts do you have about the impact on decisions? Or what other questions should we be asking? So one of the points of this exercise was to demonstrate that you can't just bring everybody up to the starting line. So that image I started with of everybody at the same starting point. Sometimes you have to give others tools to be successful. So for example, if you give everybody a bicycle, like in the image at the top, the person that is in the wheelchair can't even use that bicycle. So that tool is not going to be beneficial for that person. Or the person on the right that is short. The bicycle they were given, they can't even reach the pedals, so they're not going anywhere. Instead, if we take time to recognize privilege, recognize the challenges and the impacts of decision making, we can offer different bicycles, offer different options to make it so that way everybody can race in the race and be successful. So you may be wondering, okay, it's a good start of conversation, but where can I go for more information if I want to do some more digging? So some books that I personally have found helpful. Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. It's about the white identity and privileges of being white. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo is about not using our privilege as a weapon, not being fragile, but be willing to recognize and say, yes, I am privileged and I want to make a change. But if you're thinking something less race-based, Leadership and Self-Deception is written by the Arbinger Institute. It is a phenomenal book about looking at each other as humans rather than objects, recognizing that each person has a need, looking at each other as their actions aren't necessarily to hurt you, but for some reason they felt they needed to do that to benefit themselves. One example is there's two people driving down the road and the person up front swerves. Well, the person behind is like, oh, you're just trying to cut me off. When in fact, the first person swerved because they didn't want to run over the squirrel. So taking time to step back and say, okay, there's a reason they did that. They didn't do it just to make me mad. There's a lot of free videos on YouTube, TED Talks, or you can go to the Arbinger Institute website. If the idea of that book, Leadership and Self-Deception, sounds interesting to you, on their website, if you just Google Arbinger Institute, their website has little videos. I think there's even a 5-minute one that summarizes the highlights of the book. So that's something that you can do, and it's free. There's also podcasts. So NPR has Code Switch. There's Dear Culture, The Identity Project. Yo, is this racist? That brings out a lot of microaggressions or things that we sometimes say that we don't understand the impact on others. But use your free resources. All of these on this page here are accessible through the ISU library, local libraries. iHeartRadio is a free app where you can get those podcasts. There's a lot of different free resources available to gain additional knowledge and opportunities. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you have.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, or some people, might be very uncomfortable with talking about topics like this, or might even be pretty like defensive, just like as a natural uh like standing point. What are some good ways to start a conversation and make sure to engage with them rather than keeping them like at a distance or trying to get through that defensiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matthew. For me, I have found it most beneficial when I use I statements. I feel that XYZ is happening because I saw XYZ. So I feel the police are being brutal to the people of color because I saw this video. Nobody can argue with how you are feeling, and they can offer an alternative opinion about what you saw. But if you just keep it with the I, then you're not accusing. I think you also need to know your audience and know when it's not going to be a productive conversation. It could start out productive, but once you hit that turning point where it's no longer productive, then just respectfully, saying, we're not being conducive. I think this is where we need to end this conversation. And practice having these conversations. So if you are going to be going home over the holidays and you know that political discussions are going to come up, have that practice with someone safe. So a friend, a confidant that you can just say, okay, I kind of want to talk through this to make sure I have my bullet points and kind of rehearse it. And then take time to self-recharge because it's exhausting. But the more knowledge you have, the more facts you have, and using I statements have made huge impacts on the conversations that I have. What other questions do you guys have?
I have a question. How do you see privilege come into play at Iowa State? Like, where do you see the biggest areas for improvement or in awareness or the biggest gaps, I guess?
Three of the biggest gaps that I have seen in my career at Iowa State. First is low income first gen. So the low income first generation students don't know what questions to ask, where to go to ask questions, if they can even ask questions. They don't have that support back home saying, you need to go to the financial aid office and you need to ask them this. They don't have anybody whispering that in their ears. So they're on their own. And I feel we need to do a better job at reaching out and saying, you may not have thought about this, but these are things that you need to be thinking about. And with that, the veterans are kind of in that as well. And the prime example of that scenario is coming up. So the fall term ends right around Thanksgiving, and the spring term doesn't start until January 25th. There are 8 weeks in there in which, if you're low income first gen, you may not have a place to live. You may not have access to food. And do you know where to even ask for those resources? Do you know that there's a food pantry on campus? Because that's not very well publicized. So how does Iowa State make all of these resources more known? A couple of the other places that I see some disadvantage or lack of privilege are female identifying students. In the mechanical engineering department, we do a really good job at trying to create gender balance in our learning community program for our first semester students. But after that, they're on their own to find their female peers and get into a class together. There's a lot of self-doubt that happens when a female walks into a lecture hall of males. And oftentimes the faculty member may not even realize that they're doing this, but they call on the female student time and time again to offer them an opportunity to have a voice. But at times that gets to be exhausting because they are the only one that gets called on. And what if they don't know the answer? What if they didn't understand? And now they're embarrassed in front of the whole class. So there's some of that gender recognition that doesn't happen, but that also happens with our people of color. We are a predominantly white institution. So when a person of color walks into a classroom and sees a bunch of white students, then they become the token colored person that has to answer questions. And oftentimes it may not be through ill will, but they find themselves feeling the same way that the female felt in the scenario that I provided. So I think we need to do a better job at recognizing our gaps in the identities, a better idea at helping those students get into the same courses if they want to be. So sorry to pick on you, Anna, but if Anna wants to be in a class with another female student, does she know that ahead of time? Or is she calling all of her friends to find out what class they are in so she can get into a class where she's not the only one? And same thing for our students of color. Do they know Section 2 already has 3 students of color? And so they might find more comfort being in a class with students with that same identity. So those are some of the areas that I feel Iowa State needs to work towards. It's a great question, Jake.
Thank you.
So out of your respect for time, I see it's 11:59. I think you guys are all supposed to go. See, there I go saying guys again. I need to work on that. That's part of my privilege and my identity. But anyway, I want us to give you guys, you all, I will get it by the end of this presentation. I want to give you all my contact information. So if you want to reach out to me, there's my email address. Feel free to shoot me an email and ask whatever question you want to ask. This was recorded. If you want to revisit the recording to look through the slides, or if you want me to email you the slides, feel free to reach out to that as well. And with that, Jake, is there anything else that we need to make sure we discuss or do?
That's all I think. So I think after this presentation, we're just going to have a couple of closing remarks. So everyone that all the attendees can go and hop over to that for a couple of closing remarks, and that will be all. But yeah, we appreciate your time and making this talk and providing this kind of perspective for our attendees.
Yes.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Thank you for participating.
Thanks. And so for all the attendees, there's a link in the schedule on the Canvas page for the closing. So if you want to head over there.
Thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Mindy.